her. Perhaps not the face, but I suspect you may well recognise the pose. This is the young woman, the young girl who sat beside the soccer ground when the teams were chosen and she was the odd one out. This is the young girl who, when it came to choosing the relay races, the teams for the relay races at school, she was the one who got missed out because she was slow. This is the girl who grows up and joins your classes. This is the girl who becomes the woman who grows up and finds that she is gay and learns that her family don't want to know her anymore. This is the girl who then goes on to school and finds that academically she is doing really well, but her friends just don't match. This is the girl who feels left out. The sporting analogy is one that perhaps most of us in the room can identify with. Well, many of us in the room. I was a real roundie when I was young. I know some things never change. And so while I loved netball and while I loved tennis, and I was good at those games, when it came to the athletics teams, I was this girl. The sporting analogy holds for a lot of us because we were often the ones who were left out when they picked the teams. But for others, that daily recognition of what exclusion is all about is going to be something even deeper, something more profound. It may be because of your age, it may be because of your gender, it may be because of 1,000,001 things. The net effect of exclusion is something that is strong and powerful and underpins an enormous social problem that sits in this country that is addressed, but not, I think, yet loudly enough. And that's the issues around bullying and harassment and some of the most extreme outcomes of that around suicide. Gosh, what a downer you're thinking. What a way to start the afternoon. For some of you, the exclusion isn't about social exclusion in the community. Some of it is in families and some of it's in workplaces, but the net effect is completely all that people feel that they don't belong. And when you don't feel that you belong, when you don't feel that you matter, those long-term effects can be really, really dramatic. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever had that sense that actually you didn't matter? Can you just turn to the person either next to you or behind you or somewhere around, and as you think about that, and look them in the eye, take a moment and think about what you were going to share with them about how it feels to be left out. So just have a chat. The person next to you.
This reminds me of my niece.
Recall some memories which may well be quite painful. And yet this conference, the theme of your conference here is about connectedness and belonging and inclusion. And if we don't acknowledge the dark side of that, then how do we even know where to begin? How do we know what belonging means if you've never not known what it means? How do you know how to connect someone if you don't know what disconnection is? The themes here are really enormously positive and incredibly important, I think, for our community, for the way that we interact, not just with our students, but with each other in our workplaces. This talk about inclusion is a long garnering conversation, really. It's been gathering momentum. Increasingly, I'm hearing in workplaces conversations about engagement. And that's one of the terms that we'll talk about this afternoon. But, you know, the solutions to this aren't rocket science. They're not rocket science. These are practical, these are everyday strategies. Now, some of you may be familiar with the shame researcher, American shame researcher, Brené Brown. And if you haven't had a chance to look at her TED Talks, do. I love this quote from her. Well, actually, love's not the right word, but you can read this quote from her. This is the effect of exclusion. This is what it means. And these are the issues that your students are facing. Now, for each of us, if we go back into the situations that we've had, you will remember those teachers that made you shine, the teachers you remember with absolute fondness in your heart. You know, the ones who inspired you, the ones who gave you the courage to go on, the ones who said to you, you can do it, and they stay with us forever. But equally, the ones who shamed you into the corner because you couldn't or wouldn't, stay with us as well. So Brene Brown has a really strong point. Let me just clarify some of the terms that we're going to talk about. The first one, diversity. What is diversity? Well, actually, diversity is all of us. It's simply, quite simply, the mix. I mean, it continually amazes me that we have so many billion people on the planet, and every single one of us is different. Isn't that extraordinary when you think about it? Go figure. Even identical twins, there are things that are different. So what is diversity? Well, it's actually all of our differences, but for each of us, some of our differences seem to make more difference than others. So at the heart of us, we all have a personality, and I like this model from Gardner, Swartz and Rowe. It comes from Marilyn Logan, but at the heart of each of us is personality. I have two daughters who are lovingly called Chalk and Cheese. They're 23 and 24. I look at them sometime and I think, how did you come out of the same seed pod? Anyone in the room got kids like that? Yeah? You just wonder. So at the heart of each of us is personality, and this personality plays an enormous part in our development. But then there's another layer of internal innate qualities or characteristics that define each of us. And these are the fixed qualities that we're born with. Ethnicity, age, gender, mental and physical ability, and sexual orientation. These are the things which change not dramatically, but just who we are and who are part of our personality, part of our nature. And then the next layer, which makes us even more complex, is, are you married? Where do you live? What do you do? What do you have a faith? Where did you go to school? All of these things. So they become like layers in the onion ring, layers of an onion. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. So diversity is simply the mix of who you are and how you are in this world. That's the easy part, actually, because diversity is just the numbers. The other side of that is inclusion. So what's inclusion? Well, quite simply, inclusion is just making diversity work. So if diversity is all the differences that we have, inclusion is how we will get along together. Not just in spite of those differences, but because of them. Where does engagement fit? Well, I think this becomes kind of an equation. So that's how we make the mix work. I think it becomes quite kind of an equation. So if we have the mix, the diversity, and we add inclusion to it, as in how we make people feel, then the result will be that we have people engaged. So the inclusion is how you make people feel. The inclusion is the valuing and the respect and the appreciating and the letting people and enabling people to bring their best selves to work. What's the outcome? What's engagement look like? What is engagement? Any suggestions? What happens when people are engaged at work or engaged in their study?
They're energetic, there's a buzz, there's a flow, there's synergy, there's a flow, there's a go.
Great. Is it a good place to be?
It's a good place to be.
Yeah, we want to teach.
Motivation.
Yes, great. Anyone else? What else happens when people are engaged? Say again? Oh, what? Green? A ring? Oh, yes, when you're engaged. Yes, okay. So engagement has got commitment, an element of commitment, hasn't it? Yes. So when you're engaged, other than to be married, what else happens? Productive, yes. Actively participate. Anything else? Happiness. Happiness, yeah. So engaged is a state that we actually want to be. There's a firm called by the name of JRA Connexa, and some of you might have heard about the engagement, the longitudinal engagement survey that happens every year. And the statistics that they came up with, they talked about people in three categories. So we have the people who are engaged at work, people who are ambivalent, and the people who are disengaged. Now, of those three categories, those three survey results, which do you think would be the biggest group? The engaged, the ambivalent, or the disengaged? Well, look, you're not sure. We're all ambivalent about this. What percentage would you put on the engaged? How big do you think that percentage would be? Around 30%. So only about less than 1 in 3 people in the workforce, according to this survey, are actually engaged, actually positive, productive, happy, looking forward to getting up, saying, yes, it's Monday! And really leaping out of bed, which of course we all do. The biggest group is absolutely the ambivalent group in the middle. And they're the ones who get out of bed and say, oh, Monday. Oh, yep, okay, and off we go. And at morning tea, we spend our time flicking through the newspaper, online probably, looking for another job, because this one pays the bills. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got the disengaged. These are the ones you really don't want having in your workplace. These are the ones you don't want in your classrooms. These are the hostages. These are the hijackers. These are the gorillas, not even under the bed or in the mist. These are the ones you don't want. Actually, these are the ones who are often the ones who are feeling excluded. So let's go back to the equation. If we've got the mix of difference, we've got ways of making people feel good about themselves, then what happens? Well, we get that sense that it's okay and that we can contribute. So that stats is a really interesting one. The website JRAKenexa, KENEXA.co.nz. Put it up here. So have a look at there. Really interesting to see those results. Okay, so if that's what we're talking about, then we're really talking about inclusion for everybody, not just people who are minority groups. And this has become quite a topical conversation over recent times. In a few weeks' time, I'm going to make a presentation to the leadership team at the New Zealand Stock Exchange, which I'm really looking forward to, about unconscious bias. And the conversation there, of course, has been about women on boards and almost the quota-fication of women on boards. And often the argument that comes alongside this is, why do we have to have quotas? Why can't we just all do the right thing? Well, if we all did the right thing, we wouldn't need quotas, but then that's another argument. But diversity is not just a numbers game. This is not just about having a token man in the group, or a token ethnic group, or a token anybody. This is not about quotas. Actually, it's about having the best people for the jobs. But how can you have the best people if you don't have the pool wide enough and inclusive enough so that everybody has a shot at proving that they are the best person? That pool has to reflect that whole community, and I think that's a really important part to consider. So inclusion absolutely makes sense. But the reality for us, I think, is a kind of a result or a hangover really from the age that Stuart was talking about this morning, with the photos of people being prepared to go and work in factories, and that whole industrial revolution, post-industrial revolution schooling system, is that we are very reluctant to talk about feelings. We're reluctant to talk about and to train and to educate and discuss soft skills. Over the last 20 odd years, a lot of our professional development has been for people to be able to do spreadsheets and project plans and those things, which are really important, but actually it's communication and relationships that we need to have. And if the soft skills are so really easy, why are they so darn hard to do? So, I think there is an element that sits around this that relates to probably childhood teaching for me, and possibly for many of you in the room, because engagement and inclusion actually comes back to compassion. And when I was growing up, some of you may have had, there was a plaque on the wall that my godmother gave me that was a China plaque, and it had the golden rule on it. Did anyone else have the golden rule when you were growing up? The golden rule? What is the golden rule? So, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Yeah.
I had a different one at a workplace. Work hard today or work harder tomorrow to find a new job.
You see that?
Right? No treat intended. So the golden rule said treat others as you would like to be treated. But if we're going to start putting ourselves in other people's shoes, if we're going to look at inclusion from a perspective of compassion, I want to suggest that there is another version which may well serve us even better. And that's the platinum rule. So what's the difference?
Treat others as they would like to be treated.
Treat others as they would like to be treated. Turn to the person next to you and try and see if you can ask them, and if you get in really quick, you can ask the question first. What's the difference between the golden and the platinum? Okay, so what do you think is the difference between the two? Is there? Oh, it's huge. It's huge. Yeah. Enormous difference.
Because the other one includes dialogue and getting to know another and not making assumptions. The first one is seeing others through the lens of ourselves, whereas this one is reciprocal. There is mutuality and reciprocity and much more room for communication.
And this one requires empathy. This one requires that I actually do get to know you. This one requires that I figure out or find out from you what matters to you.
I think it involves me asking you a question rather than me requiring something of you, which are the other ones. So how do you like to be treated? And I have to listen.
And if you say, and if my answer is I want to be treated with respect, then your next question is, what does that look like? Because we know that across cultures and across difference, that respect looks different. So simply, eye contact. You know, for me, direct eye contact shows respect. In other cultures, no. So we need to understand that. Yes?
Is that not making assumptions, though, the platinum rule, that you, so you don't talk to somebody about how they'd like to be treated? Isn't there a danger if people make assumptions about how someone would like to be treated?
Yeah, and assumptions is one of the biggest pitfalls to inclusion there is. Yeah, but we all make those assumptions all the time. So if we follow the platinum rule, then we actually have to find out what it is. All right.
It feels that the second one opens up a person, the shift to the focus of attention to the other instead of oneself.
Yes.
So it's kind of there's a communication or community building.
I think it's a great opportunity. It's a great sense of possibility for me if I live into the platinum rule. Yes.
I think the first one is almost like I'm telling you that you should feel. Feel it with this. Whereas everyone's actually asking me how I feel.
Now, don't get me wrong, the golden rules have been around a long time. It's an article of compassion. And it's all about actually giving yourself a chance to relate well to other people. But I think if we take diversity into the mix, then the platinum rule certainly has something to say for it. How do people feel? Well, you know, if you are included, if you are valued, then you feel heard. You feel respected and well treated and confident and belong. And you feel all those positive things that young woman young girl at the beginning didn't feel. So, what about you? Where do you feel most included? Is it at work? Is it with the team, the group of people that you work with? Is it at home in your family space? Is it with your community? Is it with a club or a group that you belong to? Where do you feel most included? And where do these 6 senses, these 6 feelings, most kick in for you? This time, another person around you. Perhaps not the one you've been talking to. In fact, easier than that, would you please stand? And go find somebody else who you haven't spoken to today and ask them. Isn't it strange that conversations about things that make us feel good are much easier to have than the conversations that don't change us? The prickly ones. But the conversations about diversity and inclusion are not comfortable conversations always. And we've got to be willing to have them. So, thank the person that you've been sharing with. One of my favourite authors in all the world, Maya Angelou, and I think she's exactly right. At the end of the day, the people that we remember, whether they're our teachers, whether they're our friends, whether they're our family, are the ones that made us feel good. about ourselves? What's good about them? Okay, time to get into some practical strategies. What are the things that cause us problems about diversity? About inclusion, and how can we address them? And what are some of the positive things that we can do? Well, I want to suggest to you that there are actually some things that I would call inclusion derailers. The things that get us offside with diversity. The things that make our workplaces difficult. And the very first one is actually that people like us. The familiar, the similar. You know, the human brain, we're really drawn to the similar. We're drawn to what looks and sounds and seems like us, because that's easy. And often when we recruit, actually, we recruit people who are like us because we think they'll fit in. And we look at someone and think, oh no, they're not a good fit, whatever a good fit looks like. Yeah. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Do you know how long it takes to have get a first impression of someone? Yeah, actually 2 to 4 seconds. So when I stood here before, you looked at me and thought, oh, you're an old lady. Seen what I heard before, oh gosh, let me hear it out. Or whatever you do. But we look at someone, the brain goes busy looking, says, oh yes, I know, that's familiar. And then we go busy looking for information to prove that we're right. And that triggers, it comes from a whole raft of things. The reptile brain that says, I want to know if I can trust this person. So once I know I can trust the person, then I can be friends with them. Otherwise, it's the fight, fright, or flight syndrome. And that's just the way the brain goes. But our perceptions that people like us must be okay can really get us into trouble. And the more that we surround ourselves with people like us, the less room there is for diversity, the less room there is for us to be open to difference and open to how difference might enrich our lives. So be really careful and be really aware that just employing people like us on your basis, or just surrounding yourself with people like us, can be quite limiting. What's the second one? Well, the second one actually was something someone mentioned before, and that's around assumptions. What happens when we meet difference? Well, we make assumptions. It's as I said, the seen one, seen them all. So when that student comes through the door and, let me think, an example, I've done some work with Winnitech recently around Saudi Arabian students, and the assumptions and the stereotypes that came out of those sessions were fascinating. So let me just share with you on the basis of the stereotypes. So one of the stereotypes was the students always want to challenge the marks. So the minute I see that student coming through the door with the assignment, I know it's going to be a nightmare of a conversation. Really? Really? What if it wasn't? Because what happens when we make those assumptions about how someone is, again, the brain goes busy around looking for information to prove that. I'll just put my teeth back in. Information to prove that we're right. So there's no room there for variation. So what happens when cultures meet? Okay, so here's your culture, there's their culture. What happens when we meet is that we're looking for the edges. What we're looking for is actually the differences. So they notice these things about you, and you notice those things about you. But what we forget is what? All the stuff in the middle. We forget all of the stuff in the middle. So we get easily, with assumptions, we assume a lot of factors about people and about the way they'll behave, and we forget to look for the similarities. We forget. We're so caught up with the differences. Now, this isn't always conscious. This isn't always something that you deliberately go out looking for. And another big factor, and another diversity derailer or inclusion derailer, I think, is the whole thing around unconscious bias. Could you raise your hand if you're not biased, please? Or give that man a gold watch or a gold iPad or something. Actually, we're all biased. I hate to tell you this, we're all biased. It's just the way we are. Where does it come from? Bias actually comes from probably 3 main areas. It comes from people, and the people that you surround yourself, so the people who might have helped you learn your bias might have been your family. You know, when you were growing up and your mother said, be a good girl or be a good boy. And when she said you were going across the road, you said, and don't you behave like those neighbours' kids. So all of those things, those learnings about how you were to behave or not behave in the world, were taught to you early on. So people had a really strong influence on you as you were growing up. And as you get older, I guess those other influences became from your friends and from other people you work with. Other influences come from your experience. So we learn things and learn how we think people are in the world from our experience. And the third area that I think is really strong is that whole vicarious kind of experience. The media has an enormous part to play in what it feeds us and the attitudes that we develop from it. Just take a look at a newspaper, just listen to the news and look at the stereotypes. There's a, I didn't bring the pictures, but there's a great example from Hurricane Katrina. There were two pieces that appeared in the newspaper, and some of you may have seen it. And the first one, there was a picture, a photo of a young African-American man wading through water up to here, and he had a rubbish bag over his back. And the caption on the picture said, young man wades through chest-deep water after looting a grocery store. Okay? Below it, there's a picture of two Caucasian American, a couple, or a man and a woman, wading through chest-deep water, and the caption reads, couple walk through chest-deep water after finding food at grocery store. You know? Now, some of you might be thinking it could only happen in America, but it couldn't. No, it's not necessarily. We've got to be really discriminating and really discerning, discriminating in the best part of the way, about the messages that we get. Those are very strong. So bias is human. That bias is just who we are. You know, it doesn't necessarily make you prejudiced. It makes you human. Those biases are there. What we have to do is to be able to acknowledge them and to be able not to act on them. There is a fabulous website for those of you who are interested in exploring bias a bit further, a Harvard project called Project Implicit. And this is the website. It's really worth looking at. A number of tests that you can put yourself through, and they are about word association, and they will give you a really strong guide as to indicators as to your level of bias. They're absolutely fascinating. One of the most interesting things about it is that those of us who might regard ourselves as liberal and who might be thinking, well, I'm really aware of my bias and I don't act on it. No, that's right, and I don't have bias because I'm, really liberal. Actually, we've got just as many biases as everybody else. So check out your biases. I'd really encourage you to have a look at that. It makes some good talking point for your students too. One of the other inclusion derailers, I think, are the cultural norms that we have. It's really easy to derail inclusion because those things are actually, when cultures meet, it's very easy for us to be critical of people who are different from ours. If you think about your own culture and how you learn rules, a lot of that was subliminal rather than direct. You don't consciously say, well, we're off to culture class today. So because of that unconscious and slow process learning, it takes some time. So it's very easy for us to be critical of others who don't adopt the same or don't have the same kind of cultural norms that we have. An example of that is this lovely example. So you can often see what cultures believe and what they think by the phrases that they use, the phrases that they use. So over to the right here, the loudest duck gets shot. I understand that's a phrase from Japan. The loudest duck gets shot. The middle one, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Well, you might hear it here, but you would also hear it in the United States. And I know that for me, growing up, that this last one was what I was told. You can't say something nice, and you don't say anything at all. Okay, so turn to the person next to you, please, and ask them, who gets the most attention when I've got those three cultural perspectives in a meeting? Who gets the most attention? Have a chat.
And a lot of people won't say anything because they're afraid that everything they say must be nice. Then you get those.
How do you think these two will feel when the squeaky wheel gets the most attention? Gets credited for the good ideas, gets all of the airtime in a meeting. Included or excluded? Excluded. So we start to see how cultural norms affect Now, given that there's enormous variation within cultures as well as between, there's every chance that you may well have a squeaky wheel and a loudest duck in your work team. Would that be the case? Yeah. So think about that in terms of style, and think about that and how you mitigate that.
The loudest duck may patiently wait for a squeaky wheel to get shot.
Nothing like a good mixed metaphor. May well do. In fact, it may well be that the loudest duck shoots the squeaky wheel and you just can't bear it any longer. Okay. So these are really important. So, you know, as I said, more variation within a group, so we'll see these and other styles in that situation. And your job, if you're managing that meeting, if you're not the squeaky wheel, who's not, and some squeaky wheels are quite self-aware, I'll give that. But if you're managing a squeaky wheel who's not, then part of your job is to help them do so. Okay, so those are what I call the inclusion, the derailers. Those are the things that can cause problems. Let's flip now and have a look at the inclusion champions. So what are the things that you're going to do in order to encourage? Now, as I said, this isn't rocket science. This is not great scientific theory. These are simple, practical tools that you can do every day. And I want to encourage you to do these with your classrooms, with your teams, with your families and in your communities. And the very first thing I want you to do is model from the top. Because you're all communicating all of the time. And whether you know it or not, there'll be little things that you will do that will make someone feel that they're not good, that they're not valued. So think twice, because you're all communicating all of the time. The leadership, you've got to model inclusion. You've got to have that. If that's not a priority, and then all the lip service in the world won't change anything in the organisation. What can you do? Take a really good, honest look at yourself. Ask if you are in a leadership role, and aren't we all? If you're in a leadership role, ask the people around you, how do I make people feel? How inclusive am I? Do I actually give people an opportunity to be heard and to feel valued? Get someone to hold the mirror up for you so that you can get that kind of honest feedback. If you feel that maybe you're not doing something, then ask for some help. Get others to help you act on it. I think it's really important that we do that. Einstein said it all, really, didn't he? So the next thing that you can do in terms of inclusion champions, in terms of helping yourselves and your teams, is to start looking for finding common ground. As we said before, when, with somebody who's kind of polar opposite, we think that we'll never have anything in common with them. Flying down yesterday from Hamilton, I was sitting on the flight between Christchurch and Invercargill. I sat next to a young man who had quite calloused hands, and I thought, okay, so manual labour, that's fine, interesting. I wonder what he's about. I wonder who he is. I quite enjoy sitting next to people on planes. One of those awful people who likes to actually, I'm one of those even more awful people who likes to ask questions, so I don't have to say. Anyway. So he turned out 23, charming young man, absolutely great. We had a fantastic conversation, and all the way through I kept thinking about this presentation today and thinking, where's the common ground? Where's the common ground? And you keep looking, and it's there. And the connections are there, and all of a sudden the conversation takes off. So the common ground turned out to be, he's a diesel mechanic, but he wants to study psychology, and he's interested in social psychology. Bingo. It just took off after that. Was it hard to find? Actually, no. Because if you genuinely express interest in people, genuinely, and want to know about them, then the common ground is there. How do you find common ground? Well, that shared stories is really important. On the tables in front of you, or in your chair, if you're sitting in those front rows, you'll have noticed there was a card. If you don't like the one that you've got, swap it with the person next to you, and you've got one that looks interesting.
Just talk about being in an air, finding common ground.
These are conversity cards. Actually, they are a resource that was produced in order so that when people lead cross-cultural workshops, they have some way of continuing the conversation. So it's not just a
tick the box, we've done the sheep training, and go away and nothing changes. This is about how you build on finding common ground. So if you would please, take the card that you've got and look around the room and eyeball someone who you reckon will have a really interesting story to share. And it may well be someone you think, I've got no way of having something in common with you. Go find out. Okay? Go find out. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do it. Go find out.
Physically, does it?
That's what happens when you get great conversations going. You really don't want to stop. So I'm really sorry to have had to interrupt that conversation, but make sure that you catch up with that person at another point later in the conference. How hard was it to find things that you had in common? Second question, you had common ground. Sometimes it's easier than others. Now, often when people arrive new in town or new to a class or new from a new country or a new place, we have a number of formula questions that we ask them. Usually things like, what's your name? Where do you come from? How long have you been here? And there's usually a last one that says, and do you like New Zealand?
Or the common one.
What does your father do?
Chinese. Which is a bit tricky. So we have some formula questions.
Which are the
and
first
those
4 tips
questions
were you
are
on?
fine, but let's actually deepen the conversation. Let's go beyond those. Let's make it more interesting. But there's a rider to this. What I want to encourage you to do is respectful curiosity. It's really great to be interested in people and to think, I really want to know more. But be very careful about what you ask and how you ask it. Now, I know that none of you would ever ask this question, but I had a workshop where there was a woman from a refugee background and someone who, a number of others, but at the break, one of the conversations I overheard was a partly a New Zealand woman saying to this woman from a refugee background, and she said, so what was so awful about your country that you had to leave? Ouch. Now, fortunately, the woman from the refugee background was gracious enough to be able to sort of, move through that. But just let's be careful. Let's think about the kind of questions that we ask. But finding common ground, and working on those to think about, how we build those connections makes people feel that their experience, connections matter. We work better with people we trust, and we build trust by being trustworthy and by sharing our stories. Okay, all right. What else is it? All little things that matter. At the beginning of the week, I had an email from Judy Fleck, who is the administrator who's been working with the conference team here. And she said, Dear Jenny, just to let you know that when you arrive on Tuesday afternoon at Invercargill Airport, Julian Gould will be there to meet you. He'll be carrying a sign with the name on it. And I thought, that's lovely. Lovely. I really wanted to email her back and say, can you tell her to make it a pink carnation instead? But I didn't, Julian, so it's all right. The nicest things that people do for us are often the little things, aren't they? So if I ask you, what's the nicest thing that anyone's done for you this week? Wonder what that would be. It might be something like, they made me dinner. Someone brought the washing in. Someone drove me to the airport. Someone said, I'll cover your class. They'll be the little things that matter. Because those are the little things that say, I'm going out of my way for you. The little things that actually make the difference. Can you get this? Really isn't rocket science? But these little things that matter hugely. So if those little things are likely to be small, there are some other things that matter that go alongside that. There was some really interesting research done by, I can't think of her name, it'll come to me in a minute, Mary Rowe from MIT. And she talked about micro-messages, and micro-messages being the little things, the affirmations and the inequities. So micro-affirmations are the kind of little things that we do as we're communicating with someone that just encourage and support. So if you're making someone feel included, you're going to introduce them. Do you know when someone comes in and joins the conversation, a group of you having a conversation, someone comes and joins in, and yet they don't get introduced. Someone's expressing an opinion, their opinion's not asked. All of these little things just take us. So think carefully about those micro-affirmations, asking people for their opinions. Things like names, which are hugely important. Hugely important. You may well find that some of your international students are changing names and taking on New Zealand names, and some will do that because of, well, it's done because of choice, but I think a lot of it stems from a response to a Kiwi, none of you in this room will do this, I'm sure, but a Kiwi reluctance to try to pronounce names properly. And so it's, I don't want you to feel embarrassed by my name being hard to pronounce, so I'll change it to something that makes it easy for you. But our names are a part of who we are. So be really careful about that. Asking for opinions, those nods and smiles, those sort of little things that we might do as a matter of course. The flip side of that, you would never do any of those, would you? No. But you will watch and you'll see how those affect the people around you. The names that are left off the lists. The no gluten-free provided when actually all it took was an email to check. The questions that were unasked. Just keep thinking about these things. Those micro messages. Mary Rose research is also online. You'll find that really interesting as well, I think. Okay, all right. The last one, or nearly last one, listening with Ting. There's a lovely Chinese character called Ting. Do you know anyone know of it? Anyone who doesn't speak Chinese? No. Ting is the Chinese character for listening. And I think a lot of my work these days is as a coach as opposed to a trainer. And what I hear is people are desperate to be listened to, desperate to be really and truly heard. And I love this kind of character. So what this says is that listening requires your mind to understand words, your eye to observe the speaker, the non-verbal messages, your heart to understand, and of course your ear to hear the words. So do you listen wholeheartedly, or do you just listen with half an ear? Wholehearted listening transforms relationships, transforms the way people feel. Okay, we're nearly there. One of the key differences, of the many non-verbal differences between cultures, is the whole sense of difference, expectations. And if you have international students who are coming into your class from cultures where, for example, time is regarded in a very different way, then your expectations of what being on time might mean could be very different to theirs. Have the conversations, not just say, you've got to turn up to class on time, because on time might mean different things. So, for example, if I invited you to dinner at my house, which, by the way, next time you pass them through Telemuji, feel free to call in. Just give me a day or two's notice. If I invited you to dinner at my house and I said come at 7 o'clock, how many of you would be there at 10:02? Yeah, I hate you people, because really, I'm not ready. How many would be there at 7? Oh, I'm struggling. How many? I'm not ready yet. I've only just got the potatoes on and the pot's boiling. How many of you would be there at 10 past? You're my kind of people. Go figure. We're all Kiwis. We all do this differently. Lovely story from a friend who has been president of the Colombian Association in Hamilton, who said that she had invited the mayor to an opening of an association, a new association event. And the mayor arrived at 2 o'clock. She told all the community that it was 2 o'clock. The mayor arrived, fantastic, and nobody else. And at 2:30, the mayor said, "Look, I'm really sorry, I have to go. I've got another appointment, I have to go." And she was furious, because the community turned up at 4. And I said to her, how did you feel about that? She said, "I should have known. These are my people, I should have known. So what are you going to do different next time?" She said, "Next time I'll tell them it starts at 4, and I'll tell, actually maybe it starts at 6. So that, they actually get there." So time awareness is something that can cause us a great deal. So if you're really clear about those expectations, what do you expect? Is it negotiable that somebody can come to you and say, I want my grade reassessed? Is it negotiable that someone can come to you and say, I can't think of another example right off the top of my head at the moment, But other things around asking for help. If the students need help, how do they ask? If I come from a culture which is a direct communication style, then I might say to you, I'm in trouble here. But if I'm not, in the context actually of the communication is really important, and I need you to look at my body language and read between the lines, and if you're not, then how do you know? How will you know when that person needs help? So you can think of other things as well. You'll think of other things as well. So what else do we need to do? Well, you know, a lot of the work that I do gets kind of framed as politically correct. Political correctness gone wrong. And often I have people say, oh, you just want us to be nice to everyone. Well, I'm not quite sure what's wrong with that, but I like Charlene County's redefinition of PC. What's wrong with this? Why not let's redefine it? So this is not politically correct to make people feel included and valued. This is simply professional competence on your part. That's why you're there, to help students succeed, to help colleagues succeed. It's our public duty, public civility, to help people feel engaged and productive in our work, in our community. It's personal courtesy that we relate well to people and that we make them feel good. So think twice about that. So next time, I think it's a lovely way of redefining and diffusing that argument. Okay, and lastly, does this difference really matter? Does this difference really matter? A lot of the differences that are between us, actually, if we just let it go, they don't really matter. Some of them will matter, some of them make a difference. And if they're things to do with health and safety, if they're things to do with legality or cost or productivity, then maybe you've got a valid point for saying, actually, no, you can't wear sleeves that are draping down, or no, you can't have your hair down, or no, you can't, whatever it is. But if it doesn't matter, then don't let it matter. It's kind of we need to get over ourselves. So if you put it through the filter, next time there's something that you say, no, that can't happen, the whole thing about, oh, just because I don't like it, because it's different, doesn't wash. Okay, so we need to be able to say, if it doesn't matter, don't let it matter. And I know you will have some thoughts about things that you do in your workplace that actually don't really matter, but others let matter. I'm going to leave the last word with Abraham Lincoln. There's a story that Abraham Lincoln one day was with one of his aides, and he looked across the room at, must have been another congressman, I think, and he said to one of his aides, who is that man? I don't like him. I need to get to know him better. Inclusion really matters. It's the key to engagement. It's the key to making people feel that they belong and making them feel productive and successful in your classrooms and in your workplaces. I think for me, the whole thing is that this is not just my responsibility, it's actually everyone's responsibility. It's all of us need to step up so that that young girl who's sitting quietly by the side of the football field, or the young girl who's sitting in your class, or the young man who's sitting in your class, feeling marginalised, doesn't take the options that you might not want to hear about. So that it's a context where you will make people feel that they are happy to come to your work, happy to come to your classes, and they feel good about it. I've really enjoyed my time with you today. Thanks everyone, have a great time.